Welcome to Circuosity. I'm your host, Jim Strader-Sasser. Thank you for joining on the podcast today. Circuosity exists to explore life, to think about life in terms of how we improve ourselves, our circles, and our communities. It's an exploration of any number of themes, spiritual tools, psychological habits, and so forth. Today is a very special day. I've invited along a very good friend of mine, a colleague, a sage, a teacher, and just a generally well above average human being, Tenneson Woolf. So good afternoon, Tenneson.
Thanks, Jim. I love being above average with you.
I love having you be in the room above average. It definitely elevates the nature of the space. So I've invited Tenneson to come along because I want to explore some themes that he's really good at kind of drilling and nudging into. And those are themes of leaning into trouble and exploring the unknown and just figuring out how to abide in a circle with oneself and with one's colleagues and one's community a little bit better.
Thanks, Jim. I look forward to what we explore today, and I join you with that desire in me. You did ask about bringing a poem, and I have some poems that I've written, and I want to start with somebody else's poem actually today. That is a man named Jim Quigley. He lives in British Columbia, and a collection of his poems were given to me recently by a good friend of mine. And I offer this first one because it speaks to some of the mystery. This one's called Let Yourself Believe. Let yourself believe in mystery. Your belief is the required kindling. Your longing and your passion the first spark the fire needs. Jump gladly into the alchemist's cauldron. What will be left is sweeter than your wildest imaginings.
You just mentioned and brought up the notion of stories and placing stories into a cauldron. I wonder if you can tell me and the listening group a little about who you are, what it's like to be you, what provides you passion, what wakes you up in the morning and carries you through the day.
A little bit of who I am is that in a professional way for the last 25 years or so, I've worked really as a facilitator, as a workshop leader. And that doesn't say a whole lot. So when I look underneath that for, well, what's that about? You know, I'm working with people sometimes to work together. And yes, that does show up in the environments that are things like a better church or a better community. I also very much relate to just trying to be better human beings with one another. So in my facilitation work, it's all based in a participatory framework. I'll often say, as I just spoke, it's like I'm trying to help people be smarter together. But that's a little bit of code too for be more thoughtful together. Sometimes it means be more kind together. Let go of things together so that we might even be in a little more natural or organic flow with one another. And you can hear all the translations that show up in that. Some of that language really drifts into what feels like spiritual practice and spiritual orientation to me. And some of it drifts into, look, we're just trying to be a good team. I've done a fair amount of work with faith communities and educators and done a lot of trainings that use participative methods, some of those that you've experienced. So there's that layer of just professional offering. Help people do things in a good way. And then when I nuance some of that in, I am writing a fair amount of poetry lately. And there are poems to share, and that's a very satisfying and exciting path to me. That does get me up literally in the mornings, because often my writing process is in the morning, first thing. There's an artistry involved in that also. And if I'm trying to bridge those spaces together of facilitation work and poetry, I think there's an artistry needed these days in how we humans occupy spaces together. And most of us have a bunch of great training and good book learning and good head learning and stuff that can really help. And I think that many of us are actually reclaiming either a different story or a bigger story, or remembering an older story of what it means to be human with one another, that isn't just efficiency, isn't just scale, isn't just competition or capitalism. I think that many of us are reclaiming a very old collaboration story. There's so many people in organizations that are trying to figure out what to do, that are hurting, that are grieving, that are traumatized, that are passionate, that are caring, that are, wanting to animate, wanting to be awake, wanting to be in puzzlement in a different way. And it seems that we humans need a few processes to help us do that. I try to offer some of those processes.
And I think one of those that you offer, and it's space that you and I have shared on a couple of occasions, is the circle way.
Yeah.
This notion that circles provide different space than squares or boardrooms or churches that are stacked up with pews one after the other, or any number of other sorts of architectures. How did you find your way to the circle way, and why did you make a spiritual decision to germinate that work?
That's good. Yeah, I think some part of that at the super big high level, which I'm giving myself permission to speak at, is I felt led in some way. I felt some dumb luck involved. I felt some serendipity involved, maybe some providence involved also. It interests me that we human beings sort of often find our way in a path that we don't even know we're following or aren't able to articulate. That's one layer. And then another layer is, once upon a time, I began, after graduate school in organizational behavior, I began working with a woman who became a dear friend and colleague over all of these years, Meg Wheatley. And she was doing this kind of work. She was really promoting a dialogic level of change. She, like many others, were responding to the question, well, how does change happen? Mm-hmm. And with one of the initiatives that we were working on, it was based on connecting people in conversation. And some of the key people that we met back then also became good friends and colleagues and mentors of sorts along the way. Christina Baldwin and Anne Linnea, who wrote the book called The Circle Way, and through their educational organization, they were using Circle. They're my Circle teachers, and I connect most of that learning back to them, and to just noticing, by the way, that when I was in a room with them and starting to realize, oh, we put the chairs in a circle, or sometimes a crazy oval or something like that, I found myself moving my head back left and right, realizing, oh, they're doing so much more than just facilitating right now. Like, I felt like they were really tending to they were nourishing a center that we all had access to. And that had super practical applications. And it also invited the bigger story for many of us.
What struck me about Circle when I was first exposed to it was how it engages people in a unique way. And I think what happens in a lot of the organizations that I'm involved with, whether they be churchy or communities, or even as simple as going to the movie theater, that we place somebody or something, some presenter in front of us. And it becomes almost like entertain us, teach us, yell at us, do what you're going to do, and we can kind of become disengaged from that. So we really don't have to be in the cauldron, to use that term, which I like. And what circle really animates for me is that we place something in the center of the group where we all have some piece of ourselves in there, if not more than one piece of ourselves. Circle just offers this whole different layer of realities that can really take a group of people from sort of being disenfranchised or disengaged to a place of leaning in and moving into the work that's being offered to accomplish together.
Yeah, sure. That's good. I mean, I relate to the words that you're speaking. The short of it is circle works. I'm really careful. I don't want to be someone who speaks like, well, everything's a nail and circle is the hammer. That's really weird language to use there, but it's not that kind of imposition. The truth is circle animates people and individuals and groups. Is it for everything? Of course not. Is it for many things? Yes. If I language that just slightly differently, I would say that one of the things that circle does is it interrupts a pattern, a societal pattern of how we humans, meaning teams, families, communities, etc., are together. And it interrupts the pattern that I would suggest is more performative. We have to perform and we have to get it right and we have to understand it all. And instead invites a pattern of a different quality of shared attention with one another. So from performative to, whoa, we're just trying to cultivate some added capacity of attending or presencing with one another so that we can be smart and thoughtful. And circle also it interrupts a pattern, again, societally speaking, of so much isolation. We feel like we have to tend to things on our own or come up with magical solutions or all-encompassing things, or we isolate in our grief or our sadness or our I don't know what the hell to do kind of stuff. And I think circle helps to, with that interruption, reestablish a pattern of turning to one another.
What I think is interesting in what you said, or what I heard you say, is when we break or disturb a pattern or disrupt a pattern, now we're leaning into something that may feel very squishy or uncertain. Yet I would say that's often where I need to go.
Yeah. So this is going to be a little unfair. I'm going to let myself say it this way. We live in these contemporary times where so much of the storyline is packaged into a soundbite, whether that be 30-second soundbite that you hear on the radio or TV or online, or the max characters that come out of a social media Twitter post, or Facebook or other platforms that way. We live in very reductive narratives that often feel like they have huge implicit and explicit marketing behind them. The trouble, sometimes it feels like if we're interrupting the soundbiteness of things, the reductiveness of things, then one of the things that we're trying to restore, I believe, is context. And inviting people into a broader context with one another that isn't requiring any one person to sort of make an A plus B equals C formula out of that, but instead invites us into more of a shared sense making with one another. Yeah, that feels valuable. Even just the leaning in to each other's stories. When you start creating environments where that can be done, there is an inherent messiness in it. And I think we can get into all kinds of stuff that way that sort of goes against the grain of how we're supposed to do this in the fastest way possible. I think as human beings, we're confronting more scaled layers of challenge, whether that's complexity in the workplace or environmental challenge / disaster or political polarization, and leaning into more of the heart of that. So I think we need to be able to lean into more of the troubling spaces I think there's something about how our wounds can become gifts. You know, I'm a little reluctant to say this because when I'm in the thick of my trouble, holy hell, don't try to paint a pretty picture for me because I'm probably going to reject it. But there's something about how in community, actually, our leaning into the troubles together might actually provide some birthing ground for more of the gifts that we need in these days, these times.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I do believe, as icky as it sounds for people who are in the midst of some tremendous suffering or tragedy or trauma, to say, oh, you're something new and good is going to come out of this, you know, that may be complete horse crap while you're in it. And
Yeah.
it is my experience, my own personal experience, as well as my experience in organizations and families, is that when we do look into it and look within inside ourselves and do the necessary work that we need to do, there will be pain, but there is also the great probability that there will be something new that's recreational out of that, or resurrected out of that. I mean, that's just core to my understanding of the Christian tradition, probably other spiritual traditions as well. And by nature, I just think we defer, delay, deter, deny, because to go into the trouble of it, especially if we feel alone and isolated, is just a very trepidatious place to be.
It's scary.
The scary stuff is out there and it's not going to go away.
Yeah, all of that is definitely in play. Like we can come up with oodles of examples of that, and I want to be careful, a bit careful, I suppose.
Sure.
I think the capacity, the trouble that many of us are needing to lean into in the name of maturing, in the name of growing up, in the name of evolving, for that matter, is into more of that messiness. Like, do we have the ability to not chicken soup things? Now, that doesn't make you the funnest person at a party on Friday nights, but sometimes maybe that's the Friday night that many of us are calling for. And the initiated adult part of it is about like how you work with the problems in your life, or the challenges in your life, or the wounds in your life, or the embarrassments or the shames. We have a society that tends to want to like orthodontize all of that, make it perfect teeth, when crooked teeth are a reality of human existence for most people on the planet. So I love that. I know it's speaking a pretty broad narrative and pretty triggery narrative also about perhaps living in a time that feels generally, again, I'm speaking, quite adolescent. You know, we're seeing increased polarization. We're seeing increased hate crimes as one example of that in so many parts of the world. A quality of adolescence, I would suggest, is the inability to hold multiple and contradicting perspectives as valid and important all at the same time. I know you've mentioned Fire and Water, and some of that as a program that myself and another colleague and friend, Quinita Robertson, are offering that you're a part of, and is the phone call that we had. This is one of the things that we're daring to call out with one another. Like, what does it mean, or what could it mean to mature ourselves into a different kind of consciousness, awareness, awakeness, etc., that isn't performative with one another?
Let's go ahead and go there, because I think that's really a nice bridge. Because one of the reasons I said yes to Fire and Water was that I view it as person to small group to community to world transformation that I believe is inherent in doing the work that's sort of being placed before us and living into a life more holistically and abundantly. And so Fire and Water to me says, okay, you're going to show up as Jim Strader-Sasser, and you've got your work to do. You have your ancestral work to do. You have to figure out a way to communicate your story. You have to be as authentic as you can possibly be in this group, while understanding that in this group of 20 some odd folks, there are 20 some odd folks coming from a variety of social locations and all of the context of that term.
Mm-hmm.
And to use Meg Wheatley's words, does create the possibility, a great potential for creating an island of sanity, which is what I think we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us who have taken on this work, this is how I see myself in the world right now, and I need to yoke up and be in a circle with other people who view themselves as doing some sort of work similar to this. Fire and Water is yet another example of how we might bring such communities and more mature human beings into the world and offer those gifts.
Yeah, let's hope. I mean, that's what we're going to muck around in, right?
Yeah.
And I fully expect that we'll be mucking around at a layer that is that could get like significantly confusing. And a part of me doesn't want to say that. Like, wait a minute, let's keep that clean. And yet, I think that's the environment that we need to lean into. I mean, I keep telling people we're probably going to develop more capacity to be in not knowing or unknowing than in knowing. And without making that some sort of weird semantic kind of odd, twist of words, leaning in being able to do that, I think we developed some of the very skills or inner orientations that so many of us are seeking. When you use the language, Jim, of like an island of sanity, it sort of plays in my brain a little bit, because it's funny that the island of sanity is probably founded somewhat on an ability to lean into the insanity of things also.
I agree with that. That's what being human right now, quite frankly, feels to me like. And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier, which is really important, is that we're not called to do that in isolation or by ourselves. In fact, to try and do such work on our own is probably asking for trouble.
Yeah, another kind of trouble, perhaps. Mm. We're trying, and there's something in the humility of, I don't know what this path is, but I know that we should take it. I know enough to feel like we should take it. A lot of people have been speaking that way, and I think that's probably one of the things that initially yokes us together. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can think about the first or the next few steps for all of the things that you're doing, the Fire and Water, Circle Way. If I was to invite you back a year from now and you had taken a few of those steps, what would be your hope for that work?
Being able to lean into the not clear enough. So I think one of the threads that you and I are speaking is there is an ability that we need to grow or encourage or invite with one another around being willing to go further into the descent with one another, not just the ascent, although that be attractive and important, but are we able to, with honesty, claim our own descent or our shared descent? And if I suppose in all of these bodies of work, whether it's the Circle Way or other participative leadership, Fire and Water, some of the writing that I'm involved in, some of the poetry that I'm experimenting with and sharing more broadly now, that if people come back and sort of with that maybe even simplified appreciation, say things like, I didn't know I needed to go there, but now, whoa, I so appreciate going there. If we're able to help each other with enough of those stories, I would feel really happy with that. A friend, she was telling me about a book the other day, and she says she's had it on her shelf like for 5 years or something like that, and she can't get past the first paragraph. And then she read me the first paragraph, and it was a profound, deeply moving kind of paragraph. And I said, if people responded that way about my writing or workshops even, I can't get past the first paragraph. I'm still thinking about the first paragraph. I'm still churning in it. I would be quite flattered by that. I think that the work that you and I are involved in, you as a pastor, as clergy, so much of the work that we're doing is about convening and trying to create the healthiest containers we can for people to be more whole and more real together. And I have a trust that that all translates into some good stuff. And I don't want to get too predictive with that. I feel the delight and pleasure to be held in the inquiry that you shape, Jim, whether in this podcast or in other places also. There's richness to explore. And I think I leave with just a renewed appreciation of touching into the sum of it that's connected to a bigger all of it. That's what friendship and companionship and colleagueship does.
Well, thank you for saying yes. And thank you for being your well above average human beingness that I treasure so much and value. And I thank you for your wisdom. So I leave with this great sense of gratitude and the serendipity of the moments. And I'm glad that that we could do this and spend this time together.
I'll read it to you and I'll just give you a little context. It is called I'm Descending. And I wrote this, well, I wrote it more recently within the last 3 months, but it came from an experience of a couple of years ago when I was getting to do some work in Australia at a location that was in it was in some rainforest. And when I was there, I was just having like thick and full dreams. And the way I interpreted that is I felt like the land itself and its history was starting to work me a little bit. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I know that I felt like this descent into things more mythic and mysterious. So I wrote these words: I'm descending now to more of the unseen, the mysterious and perhaps mythical world that abides deep below mountain surface. I've asked for this journey from the gods, pleaded really. Things feel a bit distorted to me in this descent, in this surrender that scratches and scrapes at my psyche, yet transforms everything. I don't want to resist.
So as we say farewell, if folks would like to get in touch with you with one way or another, Tenneson, what would be the best way for them to do that or to find out more about you?
Thank you. Best two things I'll name. My website, tennesonwoolf.com, as well as, since we talked about fire and water, fireandwaterleadership.weebly.com. If you start at my website, there'll be plenty to follow.
Okay, I'll make sure that I provide links at circuosity.podbean.com to you and to your work. I'm very grateful for you, and I'm grateful for our listeners who were here today or may be here in the coming days. I invite you to follow Circuosity at circuosity.podbean.com or on Twitter or on Facebook. And if you think that this time and this space is valuable and sacred to you, please return and please bring a friend along or ask them to show up. And so until the next time, I will leave us all with this blessing. May God's grace and abundance and courage abide with us and be with us this day, tonight, and tomorrow. And may the peace of God that passes all understanding fill our hearts, minds, and souls and bodies with the nature and love of God. And the blessing of God be with us always. Thank you again for being here. God's blessings to you, and goodbye.